An Israeli flag hoisted above a rubble-strewn Lebanese village. Parts of southern Lebanon now resemble the apocalyptic landscape of Gaza, and Israel's war with Hezbollah is intensifying. This apparently all that's left of the border town of Yaroun. The Israeli army announced today another military division has now been deployed into Lebanon. Around 15,000 soldiers are said to be taking part in the invasion. Here, troops show off weapons they say they've seized from Hezbollah. But despite sustaining unprecedented and devastating blows, Hezbollah is trying to project strength. Today, the group's deputy leader addressed followers in a televised speech. I would like to reassure you, he says, our capabilities are fine, and what the enemy said about our capabilities being affected is a delusion. As Israeli airstrikes on Beirut continue, the Hezbollah deputy also said he supported attempts to negotiate a ceasefire. Significantly, he didn't draw a link between that and a deal ending the fighting in Gaza. But his words were also accompanied by a barrage of rockets fired into northern Israel, the heaviest attack targeting the city of Haifa since the war began. Most were intercepted, some landed, but with no reports of injuries. It's still Israel that's firmly on the front foot. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu suggested the man tipped as Hezbollah's new leader had been killed last week in Beirut.
We've degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. We took out thousands of terrorists, including Nasrallah himself, and Nasrallah's replacement, and the replacement of his replacement.
The pain felt in the Lebanese capital, though, extends far beyond Hezbollah members. This, one of so many schools, now sheltering displaced families. Garda and her daughter Rula fled the south of the city. They're worried about their 3 cats and 6 kittens they left behind in the care of a neighbour. I love them and miss them, Garda says.
There was a lot of people running, so we ran with them.
You must have been scared.
Definitely.
And now, how do you feel?
Still scared, but we'll manage it. We need to stay alive and live.
More than a fifth of the population is reported to have been forced out of their homes. Some resent Hezbollah for entering the war with Israel, though open criticism is rare. Many others remain steadfast in their support.
We can't see children being killed in Palestine and stay silent. If you saw me strike a child, you wouldn't be able to just watch. Your humanity wouldn't let you. So we want to defend them.
Children here in Lebanon are now also living with the threat from Israeli strikes. And for now, the bloodshed continues. Well, just as we were coming on air, reports began emerging of a suspected Israeli strike on Damascus, the Syrian capital, possibly targeting Iranian revolutionary guards in an apartment there. We'll bring you more details on that as we have them. Here in Lebanon, I think the apparent de-linking by Hezbollah today of a ceasefire with Israel from a ceasefire in Gaza will be seen by Israelis as a vindication of their strategy here, no matter how much international criticism it engenders. But will Hezbollah really be willing to withdraw entirely from southern Lebanon? Will Israel be content to trust them to do that? I think we're unfortunately likely to see significant further fighting before any resolution. A year into this conflict in Gaza, Israel is still launching fresh offensives on the ground. Right now, their forces are moving in on the Jabalia camp, 2 hospitals in northern Gaza ordered to evacuate.
Sikandar, thank you very much indeed. Well, 2 senior US senators from both sides of the political divide, Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, are in the Middle East trying to promote their diplomatic solution to this crisis. This afternoon, they were on their way to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, calling for a regional settlement, including a peace accord with Israel. Well, I caught up with them in Jerusalem after they had met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I started by asking the Democrat, Senator Richard Blumenthal, whether the US should be putting pressure on Israel to stop its attacks on Gaza and Lebanon.
Israel has a right to defend itself, and it has to make decisions tactically. We've urged that civilian casualties be reduced, that more humanitarian aid be provided in meetings before this one repeatedly. And Senator Graham and I are bringing the hope that we can help lead toward normalizing relations that will, in a longer sense, achieve peace and stability for the region.
What did we do after Pearl Harbor? We went to all-out victory. There is no military solution here. We bombed Japan to smithereens. We destroyed Berlin. That's not an option here.
But not holding them back has meant 40,000 dead Gazans?
Well, that's because Hamas wants them that way. They want it that way. I don't blame
Why
Israel.
do them the favor?
Hamas will not be standing. They will never govern Gaza again. If you get nothing else out of this interview, Hamas will never govern Gaza again. Sinwar is going to meet his fate. If you're successful to build on the Abraham Accords and to reconcile the Arab world with the Israelis, then you've truly created a sustainable solution for this problem.
Because if there is failure, then there may not be Hamas anymore, but there'll be another organization with similar policies that will be, called something different.
I couldn't agree with you more. Gazan children who've seen their parents killed, seen their neighbors killed, they will join a cause, a new cause with a new name, unless somebody comes in and takes over their lives, provides them an education system and a future that's more hopeful.
But their bitterness is created by American bombs dropped on them inside Gaza, in part, isn't it?
Well, I think their bitterness should be toward Hamas. They've been radicalized. They're the most radicalized population on the planet. From the time you're born in Gaza to the time you die, you're taught to hate the Jews.
The weapons we are providing enables Israel to defend itself against terrorist organizations, not Palestinians,
but they're also
not
killing
Lebanese,
lots of innocent
but
civilians,
terrorist organizations that want to annihilate it.
If Israel takes on Iran in such a way that this escalates and becomes a war between Israel and Iran, the United States would be obliged to enter on Israel's side, wouldn't it?
Iran has declared that it wants to destroy the United States, as well as annihilate Israel. So Israel's war is not only against the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, but against Iran. And
so that's a yes, then you would enter on the side of Israel.
I'm not predicting what will happen. Our effort here is actually to help reduce or avoid escalation and the widening of this war.
There needs to be a confrontation of Iran. We've put it off way too long. We need to call the question on Iran. They're the source of most upheaval in the region.
Regime change.
I am 1,000% for regime change, but you don't have to.
How did that work out last time America tried it in Iraq?
I think we have nothing to lose. How did it work out when we got rid of Hitler? Better. He's Hitler. So what I would say that the way the regime falls is not through an invasion, is by isolation. That if you can reconstruct Lebanon and you can get the Arabs and the Israelis working together, then Iran truly becomes isolated. That's the way the regime eventually meets its fate, is to be isolated by other players in the region.
What have you been telling the Prime Minister of Israel, and what's he been telling you about the next chess move in this very dangerous game, Iran-Israel?
So what happens in Gaza once the fighting is over? What happens in Lebanon? What's the day after look like?
Yeah.
For a year and a half, I've been coming to the region trying to sell the idea of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. What would that look like? Saudi Arabia would recognize the state of Israel, create diplomatic ties, thus ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. The biggest change in my lifetime, your lifetime, in the Mideast.
I hope that the government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, will seize that moment, and we urge to him the imperative of leading toward normalizing relations and seeking peace that will also reduce civilian casualties, bring home the hostages, and enable more humanitarian aid.
Now's the time, if you're ever going to do it, to start a dialogue with Saudi Arabia about the day after.
Right, but the Saudis have also been very clear that what they want in return, that there needs to be a viable, sovereign, independent Palestinian state which the Israelis recognize.
They want two things. For them to recognize the state of Israel, they want a defense agreement with the United States. Saudi Arabia and the United States would have a mutual defense agreement like we have with Japan and Australia. In other words, the United States would go to war for Saudi Arabia. That requires 67 votes in the U.S. Senate. Senator Blumenthal is a Democrat trying to get the votes. I told MBS a year and a half ago, that will be a heavy lift, but I will try.
But the Israelis also have to want to recognize an independent Palestinian state. They're not going to do that.
An independent sovereign nation called Palestine, with security guarantees for Israel to make sure there's no future October 7th. It will be more like an emirate than it will be a democracy. MBS and MBZ at the UAE will come in and rebuild Gaza. They will reform the PA. They will create an enclave in the Palestine that can live in peace and harmony with Israel. They will stop teaching their children to kill the Jews. A de-radicalized, a demilitarized...
Is that actually true? Is that how they teach it?
Yes, literally. So, bottom line, a de-radicalized, a demilitarized Palestinian enclave is what Israel wants. And here's the rub. After October the 7th, declaring a Palestinian state after the attack would be seen as rewarding terrorism. That's the universal view of the Jewish people. The two-state solution, as we know it, died on October the 7th.
You think it's dead?
I think as it's been envisioned in the past, it is, and I think that was the goal of the Iranians. If you don't have a day-after plan like I described, Hamas will come back. If you don't have a day-after plan like I described, Hezbollah will regenerate, and you'll have 50 years of Israel half in and half out. There will be no normalization. Nobody's going to come to this region to do business because it's going to be on fire. So if you want to beat Iran, if you want to make sure October 7th is revenge in the proper way, do peace.
We have stated emphatically and repeatedly that there needs to be a path toward peace, and diplomatic successes need to match the military successes.
If Trump becomes elected as president, where does your project go?
I think it dies. If we don't do the deal on Biden's watch, there will be no normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Because
I can't get 67 votes.
Right. President Biden, speaking in an impromptu appearance at the press room in the White House yesterday, a couple of days ago, hinted at the fact that he thinks Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to influence the American elections, which are due in less than a month. Do you think that he's right?
There was no indication in our conversation yesterday that Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to influence elections. But of course, we're not inside his head.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And before that, you heard the Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal. Well, I'm joined now by Hossam Zomlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom. Welcome back to the program, Ambassador Zomlot. You heard what Senator Graham there especially had to say. Do you think that was a realistic scenario that he outlined, or pie in the sky stuff?
I wish you didn't force me to have to hear this nonsense that actually explains why the U.S. for the last 3 decades has failed miserably to play the role of an honest mediator. Why the U.S. has failed to be the grown-up in the room, it's because of the logic expressed by Senator Graham, Lindsey Graham just now. And I was the ambassador to Washington, and I did meet Senator Graham many times, and I tried to actually persuade him that this mindset, this complete adoption of the Israeli narrative does not help the cause of peace. He needs to see with 2 eyes, but he only sees with 1 eye, and that eye is hateful, and that eye is racist.
Right. So what in particular did you take offense to in what he said?
That the Palestinian people are the most radicalized, particularly in Gaza. I mean, Gaza, he doesn't see it as the most densely populated area on earth, besieged by air and sea and land for 17 years, made of 80% of refugees who were ethnically cleansed from their villages and towns just few kilometers away from Gaza, like myself, who I was born in a refugee camp in Rafah. Yet still Gaza over all these years was able to produce the highest literacy rate in the region, the highest PhD per capita graduates, yet Gaza was able to sustain as a society. This is a person who sees us from the prism of imperialism and hegemony, and he relates only to Israel, and for him, we are the other. We are the other.
Okay.
It's very unfortunate.
All right. Okay. Right, let me just ask you this though. The Saudis have mooted a plan, which he seems to have bought into as well, which could offer a path towards a recognized Palestinian state, recognized by the Israelis. Is that not something that you might be interested in?
This is only Netanyahu's logic that Senator Graham has completely adopted, and many in the US, which is just bypass.
But what about the Saudis?
Just bypass the Palestinian issue. Anything, abracadabra, let's do anything, and we'll resolve the issue. But to actually resolve and look at the root cause, which is the Palestinian issue. Israel knows that it is the occupation, the colonization, the besiegement. Israel knows that the biggest elephant in the room is us, especially in the last year. The Saudis are very clear. I don't need to speak on their behalf. The Saudi prince, the foreign minister said it clearly. The crown prince said it clearly only a couple of weeks ago. Saudi Arabia will not normalize until a Palestinian state is established. So the Israelis and with some of their American backers has got to give up that fallacy.
Okay. Another question is this. You haven't had elections in the West Bank for a variety of reasons. Since 2006. Are you afraid that if there were to ever be free and fair democratic elections in a recognized state of Palestine, that your party, Fatah, that you represent, would lose it, and other more radical forces like Hamas or whatever they might be called in the future would prevail?
Elections are elections. We are not going to design elections at the size of Senator Graham or the West for that matter. Democratic elections must be respected, and whatever the Palestinian people decide must be absolutely respected. However, this is not an issue of leadership or democratic process. If we suggest that we haven't gained our independence and freedom because we don't have the right leaders, think again, my friend. This is about the actual issue of gaining freedom so we can convene and conduct democratic elections without the interference and the veto power of the occupier, as has been the case over the years.
In 10 seconds, do you think that anything positive at all can come out of this crisis, this war?
The realization among growing numbers in Israel itself, in the region and worldwide, that without justice and resolving the Palestinian issue in accordance with international law, that the Palestinian people shall be treated equally like all other nations, we shall not see peace and stability and security in the world, not only the region.